They didn't just shove me out of my wheelchair. They dumped me, face first, into the sand like trash. One grabbed the chair and rolled it away, laughing while the sun burned into my eyes. I tried to pull myself upright, but the pain in my leg lit up like fire. The bandages were already soaked through, red and sticky, and every grain of sand felt like broken glass grinding into the wound. I remember one cadet kneeling beside me, close enough for me to smell the sweat and cheap cologne on him as he wrapped his fingers around my ankle and slammed my injured leg into the ground. My scream didn't even sound human, it ripped right out of me, raw and helpless. He smiled while he did it. Smiled. My hands shook uncontrollably, trying to cover the bandages, trying to protect myself. I begged them to stop, to please just stop, but my voice kept cracking, swallowed by the crash of waves and their laughter. One of them poured sand over my head, slow and deliberate, like a burial. I tasted salt and dirt and blood. I couldn't wipe it away. I couldn't do anything but hurt. Beside me, my dog, my best friend, my only defense, barked twice, panic and loyalty in every sound. He lunged, trying to protect me, trying to become a wall between me and the monsters hovering over us. That's when I saw it. The rifle. Held sideways, stock raised like a club. The cadet gripping it had wild eyes, adrenaline shaking his arms. He aimed it at my dog's head, finger tight on the trigger, and the world shrank to a pinpoint. My heart stopped. All I could think was, not him, not my dog. The crack of the gunshot wasn't loud, it was final. A violent punctuation in the ocean air. Sand exploded beside us and my dog collapsed, whining, trying to crawl to me with his legs dragging. I reached for him, fingers clawing through the sand, but the cadet grabbed me by the hair and forced my head up. "Watch," he whispered. And I did. Because I couldn't look away. Because they wouldn't let me. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe if injustice makes your heart burn, because what happened next, no one could have seen coming. I never should have been on that beach alone. Golden hour painted everything gold, soft and forgiving, as if it wanted to hide how brutal life had been these past few months. The waves rolled in slow, folding over themselves in gentle crashes that sounded like breathing. I followed the sound the same way someone follows a prayer, one exhale at a time. I thought I chose the one place where pain couldn't find me again. My wheelchair left clear tracks behind me in the sand, 2 curved lines leading from the parking lot down toward the water. I remember thinking they looked like tire tracks at a crime scene, clean, obvious, and headed straight into danger. But I didn't know it then. All I wanted was peace, 1 hour of pretending my body wasn't a battlefield. The wind came off the ocean carrying salt and heat and something old, like memory. It lifted my hair and dried the sweat on my skin. I breathed it in slow, like medicine. The horizon was a razor line of gold light where the sun was starting to drop, and for a moment, everything felt balanced, pain in my leg, weight in my chest, ocean in front of me, and quiet everywhere. I could almost forget. Far down the beach, I could hear faint laughter and music, just hints of it ripped apart by distance. Young voices, careless, drifting in and out like static. I paid no attention. Nothing in my mind connected that sound to danger. I was finally breathing normally. I opened my sketchbook on my lap, propped it on the little frame attached to my chair, and started outlining the reflection of light on the water. The beach was supposed to be healing, that's what my therapist said. Saltwater, sun, horizon lines, things that give the mind distance. I told myself I didn't need anyone with me. I convinced myself I'd be safe. I had survived worse, much worse, and I believed that once you've crawled through sand in a war zone, a quiet shoreline was harmless. My dog lay beside me, paws stretched out, tongue hanging, ears always listening. He wasn't just a pet. He was trained to read my breathing, my eyes, the way my hands gripped the wheels. If I was sinking, he would know before I did. He had saved me more times than he even understood. The sun burned lower, turning the water to copper. Waves kept coming, steady, dependable, something the world could never take from me. I listened to them like a soldier listens to a heartbeat under night sky. Calm. Predictable. Honest. I remember tracing the horizon line on paper, slow and concentrated, when a shadow passed over the page. Not a cloud, a person. Then another. Then three. Their boots left deep prints next to my wheels, crushing the smooth lines I had made in the sand. The wind changed. It stopped being a breeze and became air I could taste, adrenaline, salt, and something metallic. My training lit up behind my eyes, instinct long buried under therapy sessions and prescriptions. Something was wrong. Something bad was coming. That's when I looked up and saw them clearly for the first time, 3 silhouettes against the gold sky. Young. Strong. Dressed like they belonged to something official, something disciplined. Fitted tops, camo pants, arrogance stitched into every step. Cadets. But not soldiers. I knew the difference instantly. Real soldiers have humility in their posture. These didn't. They laughed as they closed the distance, stepping over my tracks as if erasing the trail would erase me. I angled my sketchbook to close it, but my hands hesitated. I told myself not to panic. I told myself I wasn't in a hostile place. But the truth started whispering in the back of my mind, quiet and insistent. Danger is just peace that hasn't introduced itself yet. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from, and if injustice makes your blood feel heavy, hit subscribe. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about survival. They saw a wounded woman alone on the beach. That was their first mistake. My leg was still freshly wrapped from surgery. Go ahead and imagine the kind of pain that feels like your bones are being welded together from the inside. Every step, every shift of weight, every bump of the wheelchair sent a deep shock through me. Not a sharp pain, but a dull, unstoppable one, like someone drumming on the same bruise over and over. I had been wounded recently, and recently is a dangerous time. Your body's still figuring out what's left of you. Your mind is still deciding whether survival was worth it. Some days I could make it down the pier and back. Other days I couldn't get out of bed. Today, I thought I was strong enough. I told myself I earned a quiet moment. Mobility was complicated now. The wheelchair wasn't freedom, it was compromise. I learned every crack in my neighborhood sidewalks, every angle of every slope. I learned where gravity is your enemy. I learned that even sand, something soft and innocent, can become a battlefield when wheels sink unevenly and leave you exposed. Chronic pain is a thief. It takes energy before you even use it. By the time I reached the beach that day, I was already tired. Exhausted in that invisible way where the outside looks calm, but the inside feels like it's burning out. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want pity. Pity is another kind of trap. My dog understood in ways humans don't. He could read my breathing patterns, catch the tremor in my hands before I noticed it. He could press his weight against my leg to ground me during flashbacks. He was trained for trauma episodes, trained to pull me back from edges I couldn't see. He was more than a companion. He was a warning system, a lifeline, a second nervous system when mine misfired. People see a service dog and think, therapy. They don't see the nights he woke me from nightmares soaked in sweat. They don't see him standing guard in hallways when the world felt too loud. On that beach, he lay beside me like everything was normal, but I could feel through the leash that he sensed something shifting in the air. What those cadets didn't know, what no one knew, because I made sure of it. Is that before the wheelchair, before the bandages, before the scars, I was a Navy SEAL commander. I moved men through darkness on foreign soil. I cleared buildings in silence. I made decisions that kept people alive. I've been shot at, I've been blown off my feet, I've watched friends die, and I've crawled through sand with weapons and secrets in my teeth. So sitting on that beach with a pencil and sketchbook wasn't weakness, it was recovery. It was the closest I'd come to peace since the war. I came here to sketch the ocean and breathe. To remind myself I was still capable of beauty. To remember there was something worth fighting for. But as those cadets closed in and the wind shifted, and my dog's ears pricked, I understood that this day would take my breath away for a different reason, not the ocean, not the light, not the color of the waves, but the way cruelty can appear out of nowhere. Without warning, wearing a smile. I'd been trained to read danger long before it announced itself. I knew the signs, the posture, the confidence of someone who's never lost anything. And right then, sitting half sunk in the sand, leg wrapped, heart beating slow and steady under the sound of surf, I realized I was about to learn whether I could still fight. Not the way I used to, not with rifles and strategy and teams in formation, but with whatever was left of me. They had no idea who I was. They saw a victim. And sometimes, that's the safest disguise a warrior ever wears. They came toward me like they owned the sand they walked on. 3 cadets in fitted olive tops and camouflage pants, boots kicking up little explosions of grit with every step. Their laughter traveled ahead of them, loud and careless, the kind of sound people make when they believe nothing in the world can touch them. I saw the shoulder patches first. That's always how my brain works: detail, insignia, identification. These weren't unit patches or deployment badges. They were academy logos, stitched symbols of a school trying to teach discipline without ever having seen real discipline. Military school kids. Future officers with clean hands and loud mouths. Fancy training, no scars. They strutted like they were born on a battlefield rather than raised on safe campuses. Loud, rowdy, bored. The kind of boredom that turns people cruel because consequences are a myth to them. They didn't even look at me at first. They looked at my wheelchair. They looked at my dog. They looked at each other. That's when the arrogance clicked in. Untouchable. That's the worst type, entitlement mixed with no real fear of being challenged. I've seen real warriors. I've stood beside men who walked into gunfire with steady breathing. I've watched soldiers freeze when a kid in a doorway held a homemade trigger. I know what fear looks like when people feel it for the first time. These cadets didn't have fear. They had attitude with nothing backing it. They were warriors only in their minds. One of them carried that swagger you only see in someone who thinks they're invincible because nothing truly dangerous has ever stared back. He was tall, square jaw, haircut too perfect. He glanced at me like I was scenery. Like I was part of the beach, something to step over. The second one was smaller but meaner, that type who laughs first at any suffering, the hyena kind. He kicked at the sand like he wanted to find something to break. His eyes lit up not at beauty, but at vulnerability. The third stayed a step back, assessing, smirking. He looked at my dog, measuring distance, reading posture with all the confidence of someone who's never actually been bitten. They didn't see a woman trying to heal. They didn't see a soldier who'd commanded teams through live fire. They just saw a wounded person in a chair. An easy target. There's a specific way people look at you when they think you can't fight back. It's not pity. It's entitlement. It's like they've already taken something from you just by assuming they can. Their boots got closer and the tone of their laughter changed, lower, directed. They switched to me, circling just a little, like kids deciding how to start a game. Except this wasn't a game. Not to me. One of them put his hand on the back of my wheelchair, fingers closing around the handle like he owned it. Just that casual touch, that assumption, told me everything I needed to know. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He just took control of something that wasn't his. They saw a wounded woman as entertainment. And that was the quiet moment right there, when their shadows covered my sketchbook and their boots blocked the sun, when the entire beach changed. The water kept rolling. The sky stayed gold. But my pulse shifted, muscles tightened, and instinct whispered from somewhere deep in me that hadn't died yet. They think you're weak. They have no idea. It started small, the way these things always do, the kind of disrespect that masquerades as a joke before it turns into violence. One of the cadets crouched down beside me, close enough that I could see the salt crusting at the corners of his sunglasses. He picked up a handful of sand like it was nothing. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he kicked sand straight into my sketchbook. Grains sprayed across the page, scratching against my pencil lines, burying the horizon I'd been drawing under a dirty blur. My reaction wasn't dramatic. No scream, no outburst. Just a freeze, a tightening in my shoulders, a subtle shift in my breath, the way a soldier braces when a flashbang goes off in a room. He laughed like he expected outrage. He wanted the reaction, the spark to light whatever chaos he had planned. Another cadet moved around behind me, the crunch of his boots loud in my ear. He put one palm on the left wheel of my chair, then the other hand on the right. He locked me in place. A simple gesture, but it was tactical, intentional control. It wasn't enough to ruin my art. He wanted to remove my escape. He wanted me pinned. "Where you going, princess?" he said, leaning over me, breath hot on my cheek. "Beach is big. We're just sharing it." My hands curled around the armrests. I didn't answer. I tracked his position without looking. I noted his stance, bent knees, careless weight shift, center of gravity too high, someone who's never fought for real. My dog noticed too. He was lying beside me one moment, and in the next, he was up, ears forward, shoulders tense, mouth open just enough to show warning, not attack. It wasn't a bark at first. It was a growl, low, steady, professional. My dog was trained to read situations, crowding, audible distress, foreign hands on my chair. He activated like a switch being thrown. The third cadet snapped his fingers and taunted him, like calling a child over. Look at that. Good boy. Good little guard dog." Then came the barking, sharp, controlled, 2 bursts. Not wild. Not reckless. Protective. A warning shot from a loyal bodyguard who didn't need permission to defend. They laughed at the sound. Those who've never faced consequences always laugh first. One of them clapped sarcastically, slow and theatrical. "Calm down, princess," he drawled. "We're just having fun." Fun. That word hits different when you've seen real violence. I wanted to tell him something cold, something that would make his throat tighten, but words weren't going to stop what was coming. Their eyes were already changing. They were checking each other, feeding off the rush. The casual cruelty was sharpening into something else. I reached down to touch my dog's neck, just 2 fingers brushing his fur. That was our signal, steady. He didn't lunge. He didn't snap. He stayed in position, vibrating with controlled tension. Waiting. In my head, training lit up like a map. 3 hostels. 1 control point, my chair. 1 entry route to my dog. Crowd psychology escalating. No visible weapons, yet. I'd done threat assessment drills in real war zones that started slower than this. 1 cadet leaned in again and used a toe of his boot to shove my dog's paw. Not hard, but enough to provoke. "You gonna bite me? Huh? Big bad protector dog." My dog growled again, deeper this time. A sound built in the chest, not the throat. A warning only experienced handlers recognize. But they weren't handlers. They were amateurs with power. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I could feel the heat in my leg, the pain hitting a different frequency now, sharper, electric. Every sense dialed up just a little. Wind direction. Distance to water. Sunset angle. 3 bodies moving around me. And underneath it all, a thought that came as clear as the tide washing in. They think they're in control. They have no idea what real control looks like. It happened fast, too fast for thought, but not too fast for memory. Memory slows everything down. 1 cadet crouched low and yanked my bandaged leg like he was trying to pull weeds from a garden. I didn't scream at first, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain was so sharp it stole the sound right out of my throat. It was a bright, white pain, the kind that makes the edges of your vision go darker. He smiled while he did it, his eyes fixed on my reaction like my pain was entertainment. Another one stood right above me, shadow blocking out the sun, and he poured sand over my head. It wasn't a dump or a toss, it was slow. Controlled. Handful by handful. Sand filled my hair, my ears, the back of my tongue. I blinked and felt grains scrape across my cornea. It was humiliation disguised as casual cruelty, the kind people do when they want to remind you of helplessness. Meanwhile, my dog exploded into motion. One moment he was rigid beside my wheels, the next he was moving, lunging with pure instinct and loyalty. Not rage, purpose. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to create space. Protect. Get between my body and theirs. The third cadet reacted almost on reflex. His hand shot out and grabbed my dog by the collar. I heard the metal clip grind against fur and teeth. My dog twisted, choking, trying to get leverage, trying to plant his paws in the sand, but the cadet had weight and height and a fist around his control point. The scene blurred, then snapped into perfect clarity. 3 bodies. 1 target. My dog gasping against pressure. I'd seen this kind of behavior in training, not the violence, but the posture. The cadet with the collar grip squared his shoulders like someone lining up a strike. That's when I noticed the weapon. It didn't look like a rifle at first. The sunset caught the steel and threw a streak of light that hid it for a second. Then I saw the lines, the stock, the way he held it. Not aiming to shoot, just raising it like a baseball bat. There's a moment in every violent event where time becomes something strange. Not slow, stretched. Every detail becomes its own world. I saw sand flying off his boots. I saw my dog's nostrils flare, breath broken and desperate. I saw the cadet's fingers tighten around the grip. The moment before impact is longer than time. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the ocean. I could count the breaths between heartbeats. My military training kicked in like muscle memory. Assess. Angle of the strike, downward, right to left. Identify. Weapon type, rifle stock, dense, capable of blunt trauma. Calculate. Distance, less than 1 arm's length. All those years of tactical drills surged up through a body that couldn't move fast enough anymore. It was cruel in a way I can't describe, being able to think like a soldier but not act like one. I reached out anyway. My fingers scraped sand, grasping for fur, metal, sleeve, anything. I tried to grab the cadet's wrist, my hand shaking, but I was half buried, pinned by their weight and my own pain. The bandage around my leg pulled and tore under pressure. I wanted to shout commands I hadn't used in years. Stand down. Drop weapon. But there wasn't time. There wasn't air in my lungs. My dog barked once more, short, sharp, the kind of sound handlers recognize. A warning. A last one. The cadet's arms came down. Everything contracted to a single point, sand suspended in the air, the glint of metal, the sound of the ocean suddenly distant. That was the instant when I knew something irreversible was happening. And out of all the things I had trained to survive, all the missions I'd prepared for, nothing had prepared me for the feeling of watching someone raise a weapon against the only thing in this world that had kept me sane. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen loyalty tested in the worst moment, hit subscribe, because what happened next took the beach, the pain, and the past, and turned them into something I never thought I'd have to face again. The sound wasn't what I expected. People think gunshots are loud because movies make them echo. But this one came out sharp and immediate, like someone snapping a branch right next to my ear. A shot rings out. Sand sprays up in a fan, catching the light so it looks almost pretty, glittering, suspended, wrong. My dog let out a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not a bark. Not a growl. A whimper that cut short, like breath caught on a hook. Then his legs folded under him, and he collapsed beside my wheels. The leash went slack. His body hit the ground with a dull thump that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. They shot my dog. And they laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not shock. Actual amusement. Like breaking something valuable just to watch someone else react. The one holding the rifle grinned down at me, teeth bared. "Relax, he's just a dog," he said, voice casual, bored even. Then he nudged my dog's body with his boot, checking for movement like someone poking a dead fish on the shoreline. I didn't feel rage first. I felt nothing. Absolute zero. That's the dangerous part. That's the military part. There's a switch inside some people that flips when the world crosses a line. Mine didn't flip into anger. It flipped into awareness. Everything narrowed. Where each cadet stood. The weight distribution on their feet. The carry condition of the weapon. The direction of the sun. The proximity of water. None of this was emotional. It was tactical. Survival systems over heartbeat. They thought taking down my dog was the end of the story, like violence is a full stop. They thought pain was a weapon, and using it meant dominance. They had no idea who they just threatened. I looked at my dog's flank, scanning automatically for breathing. I saw his ribs move, slow, shallow. Alive. That was all I needed to know. Not safe, not unhurt, just alive. Information. That became the only thing that mattered. But they didn't see that flicker of relief. They only saw a wounded woman frozen in sand, eyes wide, jaw set, hands trembling over bandages. They saw me as broken. A victim. A target that couldn't push back. One cadet crouched again, leaning on the rifle like a cane. He watched my face the way a gambler watches dice roll, hungry for reaction. "You keep looking at him like that," he said, "and I might put another round in him just to see what you do." He expected begging. He wanted panic. He wanted power that tasted like someone else's fear. I didn't give him a word. What I did instead was breathe. In slow. Out-controlled. Box breathing, 4 seconds in, for hold, for out, for hold. Something I learned in training to slow adrenaline, to keep hands steady when everything in you wants to shake. I didn't realize I was doing it at first. The body remembers what the mind forgets. I felt the sand on my palms. I felt the weight of the sunset on my skin. I felt every old scar in my body wake up. And beneath all of that, buried but not gone, something ancient and disciplined started rising. Not anger. Not hatred. Something colder. Focus. They were still laughing, joking with each other about teaching me a lesson. One of them found my sketchbook half buried and ripped a page out, crumpling it like garbage. Another kicked my overturned wheelchair, just because he could. In their minds, the moment was finished. Scene over. Story already written. But they didn't understand the truth. Pain doesn't end stories. Pain changes strategies. I looked at them not as 3 bullies, but as 3 targets with pattern weaknesses. The one who handled the rifle-led influence. The one who grabbed my wheelchair and forced control. The one who dumped sand sought humiliation. Different roles. Same arrogance. And for the first time since they appeared, I felt something I hadn't expected. A strange, cold clarity. The kind you feel when you remember you've walked through worse hell and lived. They didn't know what I was capable of. They didn't know what training lived under my skin. They had no idea that threatening the one creature that saved my life in more ways than medicine ever could was the single biggest mistake they would ever make. Before we move forward, if you're still here, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe, because the moment these cadets thought they won was exactly the moment I stopped being afraid and started remembering who I am. I wasn't the only one on that shoreline, but I didn't realize it until later. The beach curved in a long arc, and miles down the sand, there was a figure I hadn't noticed before, a lone jogger, moving steady, rhythmic, the kind of pace you only see in people who've trained their bodies to run not for sport, but for survival. He must have seen something change in the air. Maybe he heard the gunshot carried along the wind. Maybe he saw the way 3 bodies crowded around one wheelchair. Whatever the reason, he changed direction mid-stride, not slowing down, not thinking, just altering course like instinct had taken over. He didn't shout. He didn't call out. No introduction. No warning. Just movement, fast, precise, direct, like closing a gap in a tactical assault. The cadets didn't notice him yet. Why would they? Predators rarely look for something stronger coming their way. They were still busy kicking sand, poking my dog with the toe of a boot, waiting to see if I would break. He covered the distance like the ocean covers sand, steadily, inevitable. His steps didn't stutter or crunch the way theirs did. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. People think bravery is loud. It isn't. Real danger arrives quiet. His clothing was simple running shorts, plain shirt, nothing that gave him away. But posture is its own uniform. Shoulders slightly forward, hands loose, not clenched. Eyes locked in, scanning not the beach, but angles, approach vectors, threat positions, weapon placement. I've only ever seen that kind of focus in one place. Combat training rooms. Silent men with pasts too heavy to talk about, carrying trauma in their bones instead of in their words. You can always spot it. It's like seeing a ghost you recognize. He slowed only once, just for a split second, to assess. Not to decide if he would intervene, but how. That pause told me everything I needed to know. Tactical minds don't rush, they calculate. He saw. The cadet with the rifle. The one behind my chair controlling movement. The one closest to my dog. He read the situation the same way I did, but without the pain fogging his vision. There was no hero entrance. No cinematic shout. Just calculated acceleration. His feet dug in deeper, speed increasing without flexing shoulders. That's how military men run when closing on a target. You minimize upper body motion to keep eyes stable. The sun lit him from behind, turning him into a shape rather than a person, and for a moment, he looked like he was part of the horizon itself, a line of motion breaking through stillness. He wasn't big, not bulky. Strength in him looked quiet, like a coiled rope. You only know how powerful it is once someone pulls it tight. The cadets were too busy laughing to see death coming for them in running shoes. He stopped 10 steps away, stance settling into something balanced, tactical, grounded, knees bent slightly, weight centered, one foot back just enough to pivot without thinking. Hands relaxed, open, fingers spread in a way only trained fighters do, ready to strike, grab, or redirect force. I didn't know him. I didn't speak to him. But I recognized one thing immediately. This man knew violence intimately. And he knew control even better. The audience doesn't know him yet. The cadets sure didn't. Not even I fully understood in that moment. But somewhere under the pain and sand and fear, a realization formed that would change everything. He wasn't jogging for fitness. He was running away from things he never got to leave behind. A Navy SEAL commander learns to move that way, but I didn't know that then, not fully, not consciously. All I knew was that something dangerous was about to happen, and for the first time since the gunshot, it wasn't directed at me. He moved before any of us fully registered that he was there. One moment he stood 10 steps away, silent, unreadable, and in the next, he was inside their perimeter, like a ghost crossing a doorway. There was no roar, no warning, no posture of intimidation. Just entry, direct and clean. The first cadet, the one with the rifle, didn't even get a chance to reposition. The stranger's hand shot out and closed around his throat, not squeezing, just locking. A pressure point hold, placed exactly at the side of the neck where control is instant. The rifle slid out of the cadet's grip almost effortlessly, like metal had learned to obey skill. The second cadet tried to move, but a joint popped under redirected force. Not a scream, nothing dramatic, just a sudden shift in posture, body collapsing into compliance. It was the kind of movement that only happens when someone knows exactly where to apply leverage. No anger, no hesitation. Just mechanics. The third cadet lunged, panicked, reaching toward my dog, but the stranger was already behind him. A simple motion, a forearm positioned precisely around the shoulders, and the cadet was caught in a controlled choke, not cutting off air, just shutting down movement. His arms went limp almost instantly. No wasted energy. No shouting. No threats. It was all technique. I've seen a lot of fights, real ones, where desperation and rage make everything sloppy and loud. This wasn't a fight. It was intervention, surgical and fast. He rotated through them like someone working a sequence he'd done 1,000 times. Redirect threat. Neutralize limb. Control airway. Eliminate forward motion. Feet hardly shifting in the sand, only micro-adjustments, little pivots, like a dancer who learned choreography in darkness. 6 seconds. Maybe less. Sand flew up in streaks around heels and hands, spraying across my lap, catching sunlight like sparks. Bodies hit the ground without impact sounds, just muffled drops, breathing stolen out of the moment. Breathing stops. Rage becomes cold professionalism. The beach went silent except for the ocean. The cadets weren't unconscious, not entirely, just incapacitated, caught in holds they couldn't break, watchers now instead of aggressors. Shock replaced laughter. The stranger didn't look at me, not yet. His eyes stayed on the threats, scanning them for signs of continued danger. I knew that gaze, that constant assessment, the 360-degree awareness that never really shuts off once you've been trained to use it. He stood with his back to the water, body angled slightly to keep both the rifle and the cadets in his peripheral vision. His breathing was even, controlled. No adrenaline spikes. Pure muscle memory. For a moment, I didn't breathe at all. Watching someone else move like that, with that confidence, that precision, was like seeing a reflection of a past life I'd tried to bury. I recognized every technique. A throat lock taught to stop escalation. A joint rotation meant to disable without permanent damage. A choke designed for compliance, not cruelty. He wasn't improvising. He was executing. And then, something small but unmistakable happened. His shoulders dropped half an inch, just enough to signal internal transition. Threat neutralized. That gesture is something only people with training ever learn, a subconscious release of potential force. He didn't ask them why. He didn't play hero. He didn't demand apologies or explanations. He simply ensured none of them could move without his permission. Sand settled. The rifle lay on the ground like a toy someone dropped mid-play. The sunset made everything look deceptively peaceful. In under 6 seconds, the balance of power on that beach had shifted. I went from being surrounded by cruelty to being in the presence of someone who understood violence as a language. Not ego. Not dominance. Control. Before I could speak, before I could even thank him, something old in my training whispered a realization I hadn't felt in years. That wasn't luck. That was protocol. This stranger wasn't just someone who knew how to fight. He was someone trained to end fights before they start. And I hadn't even seen his face clearly yet. The moment they stopped moving, he changed. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't slow. It was subtle, like a light dimming in the back of a room. His posture softened, not weak, just no longer preparing to strike. The kind of shift you only notice if you've lived around warriors long enough to recognize the difference between combat stance and post-engagement assessment. Without looking at the cadets again, he stepped away from them and knelt beside me in the sand. He didn't make eye contact at first. That's something only people who've seen trauma learn. Don't force someone to look at you when their body is in shock. He kept his gaze on the ground, on my dog, on the space just in front of my knee, giving me room to breathe. Don't move, he said. Not a command, a recommendation. A medic's tone. Quiet, low, steady. It cut through the panic faster than shouting ever could. He reached for my dog, hands gentle in a way that didn't match what I'd just witnessed. He pressed 2 fingers near the ribs, feeling for breath. Then one hand slid under the neck, checking pulse. Efficient, practiced motion. My dog whimpered, a weak noise, but his chest rose. Shallow, but real. He's hurt, but he's alive. Those were the first words he spoke to me directly, and they came out calm, like a diagnosis, not a consolation. He looked around, scanning the beach for anything he could use. Every motion of his eyes was strategic. He reached down and pulled a small towel from his running bag, rolled, compact, clean. He unwrapped it and compressed it against the wound without hesitation. He didn't fumble. He didn't panic. He stabilized. "I need pressure here," he murmured, mostly to himself and then to me. "Keep your hand firm over this spot." I placed my palm on the towel. My hand shook, but it held. The warmth of my dog's body under that cloth grounded me more than anything else could have. The stranger sat back on his heels and pulled a phone from somewhere, not a pocket exactly, because his movements didn't break form. He tapped a number fast, without searching his contacts or checking a directory. A number committed to memory. Veterinary clinic. Emergency line. When the call connected, his tone changed again, steel to professional communication. Short sentences. No wasted words. He gave location, injury type, approximate condition. No panic. No emotion. Gunshot wound to canine torso. Entry visible, no exit. Shallow breathing, responsive to touch. He recited, voice level, like reading coordinates. I recognized that cadence. Tactical medical response. The same kind we use for casualty reports in the field. He wasn't just a fighter. He was trained to save his own. When he ended the call, he finally looked at me. Really looked. Not scanning, not assessing threats, but human contact. His eyes held something heavy but contained a weight that doesn't show unless you've carried it over distance. "You did good," he said quietly. "He stayed with you." I wanted to say thank you, or ask who he was, or scream that none of this should have happened. But I couldn't get anything past the blockage in my throat. So I just nodded, fingers pressing into the towel, feeling the weak but present rise and fall of my dog's chest. The cadets were still on the ground behind us, groaning, confused, their arrogance slowly draining now that someone had taken their power. But the stranger didn't spare them a second glance. They were no longer the priority. He tore a strip from the corner of the towel, not ripping fabric wildly, but splitting seams exactly where the weave would hold under pressure. Military detail. Field improvisation. "Keep talking to him," he said, nodding toward my dog. "Let him hear your voice." So I did. I said his name. I said, "Good boy," over and over, not because I believed my voice could stop pain, but because I needed him to know he wasn't alone. The stranger placed 2 fingers on my wrist briefly, checking my pulse without asking. He didn't need permission, he needed data. He knew shock signs. He knew trauma response. He knew monitoring vitals in chaotic environments. He wasn't some random jogger. He wasn't a civilian trying to help a stranger. He was someone who had done this under fire. Someone who knew exactly how to move between violence and care without getting stuck in either. Behind my eyes, old instincts stirred recognition, not in words, but in memory. SEAL. Or Special Forces. Or something adjacent. Everything about him said elite training, the kind that doesn't come from gyms or movies, but from operations, mistakes survived, people lost and remembered. And in that moment, kneeling on a beach with blood in the sand and sunset burning behind us, I understood something I hadn't yet admitted. I wasn't the only one on that shore with a past I couldn't talk about. The beach should have been the end of it. 3 cadets, a gunshot, witnesses, emergency response on the way. In a normal world, justice would have been immediate. Arrests. Statements. Charges. But violence isn't the worst part of these stories. The aftermath is. The vet ambulance came first, not the police. They took my dog, stabilized him, and left before the sun fully set. I remember the stranger telling them he'd meet us at the clinic, then turning back to me and saying, Don't sign anything. I didn't understand then, but I would soon. The town sheriff arrived next. A man with tired eyes and a badge that looked older than his authority. He approached like someone already exhausted by what he might have to do. The cadets were upright again, bruised but breathing, and suddenly they were victims in their own narrative. "We have reports of a disturbance," the sheriff said, eyes skimming over my wheelchair, the sand in my hair, the blood on my dog's towel. "We need to get everyone's version of events." Version. Plural. The word sat wrong immediately. The stranger stood beside me, but slightly behind, not interfering, just present. The cadet spoke first, too fast, too practiced. "She provoked the dog, sir. Animal went crazy, attacked us. We feared for our safety. She pulled a weapon." Lies stack quick when people are used to consequences disappearing. The sheriff wrote everything down like truth was a matter of handwriting. Then the superior officer arrived. A colonel from their academy, boots too clean, jaw clenched with entitlement. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked through me, like I was paperwork, not a person. "Let's avoid making this bigger than it needs to be," he said. "Kids make mistakes." Kids. They weren't kids. They were grown men with a gun. He stepped closer, voice low, professional poison. "Sign a complaint saying it was a misunderstanding, and we'll cover veterinary expenses." As if the price of a life was a receipt. The stranger spoke for the first time since the beach fight, voice calm but precise. "She's not signing anything." The superior officer's jaw tightened. "And who exactly are you?" The stranger didn't answer. Silence can be power when you've earned it. After that came the lawyer, polished, confident, carrying papers clipped neatly in a manila folder. He smelled like lemon cologne and money. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about my dog. He spread the papers out across a diner table when we met the next day, like it was a transaction instead of trauma. "Property damage," he said, tapping a line with his finger. "The dog caused scratches on one of the rifles, knocked a cadet backward into a vehicle. That's repair cost. If you refuse to sign, we'll pursue damages." Damages. I wanted to laugh. They shot my dog, and he talked about scratches on a rifle. Then he slid another paper forward. A cease and desist. A non-disclosure. Legal threats condensed into paragraphs. "You sign here, we make this go away," he said. Simple. No court, no press. He wanted me to say I provoked them. That my dog was aggressive. That I was unstable due to injury and medication. I felt heat rising, not in anger this time, but clarity. The same clarity from the beach returned, that cold awareness pulling my spine straight. I refused. I pushed the papers back across the table, sand still in the creases of my bandage, dog fur clinging to my clothes. "No." The lawyer smiled, the practiced kind, rehearsed in boardrooms and county offices. "Think carefully," he said. "Agencies fund our academy. We can make life uncomfortable. Remember where you live. Leases can be terminated. Benefits delayed. Lawsuits filed." That's when I understood. Violence wasn't their only weapon. They could use reputation, bureaucracy, community pressure. A system built to protect them could be deployed against me. I stood up slowly, pain firing all through my leg. I didn't look at him. I didn't try to argue. I just said, "Do whatever you think you can." He thought that was another kind of permission. I refused the papers again. I walked out. And that's when they escalated. They didn't come back to the beach. They came to my life. The landlord stopped returning my calls. The mailbox started filling with anonymous warnings. I found a note taped to my door one night, just 3 words, written in thick black marker. "Next time, bring a coffin." Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen power hide behind paperwork instead of accountability, hit subscribe, because corruption backed by entitlement doesn't disappear, it regrouped. And the next stage wasn't intimidation. It was attack. It didn't stop with papers and threats. People like that don't rely on words when they think consequences are optional. It happened 3 days after I refused to sign. I came home from the follow-up vet visit, my dog bandaged, sedated, breathing shallow but steady, and something felt different the second I pulled into my driveway. Stillness. The wrong kind. My porch light was on, but the house was too quiet. Not the usual quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind of quiet where a space has been touched by hands that don't belong there. I pushed the door open and smelled something I didn't expect. Aerosol paint. Chemical. Sharp. Recent. I froze at the threshold and let the training surface. Scan, left, right, center. Assess entry points. Count disturbances. The air inside felt heavy, like a room that had been open too long. I rolled forward a few inches and saw it, my beach supplies tossed everywhere. Sketchbooks torn in half, paint tubes stepped on, brushes snapped and scattered across the floor. Chaos, but intentional chaos. Not a robbery. A message. Every page I'd drawn at the beach was shredded. The horizon lines I'd tried to capture, the light on the water, torn and crushed like they wanted to destroy even the idea of peace. The worst part wasn't the mess. It was the wall. Red spray paint, big block letters, high enough for eye-level attention. Next time, it's the dog's body. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. Those reactions burn out fast. I'd already run through fear at the beach. I'd run through anger at the lawyer's table. What I felt now was absence. The last drop of hope evaporating quietly, leaving something else behind. Resolve. I closed the door gently, like I was protecting something fragile, and wheeled further inside, rolling over brush handles and scraps of torn watercolor paper. My dog let out a soft noise, confused, lifting his head from the blanket in the corner. Even sedated, he sensed disturbance. His ears twitched, eyes scanning, waiting for command. I whispered his name, steadying him, steadying myself. My hands shook, but my breathing didn't. Years of military conditioning show up when emotion doesn't know where to go. I listened. Silence. The kind that comes after violation, not before. Whoever did this was gone. That's when the practical mind took over. Check windows. Check locks. Clear hallway lines. Note angles of entry. They hadn't taken anything of value. Just dignity, just calm, just sanity. That's the cruelty of organized intimidation. It doesn't want possessions. It wants control. I picked up one of my ruined pages. A watercolor of foam on sand, torn straight through the center. I held it for a moment and thought about how ridiculous it was. A grown man with a gun shooting a dog, then threatening artwork. It almost would have been comical if the message wasn't deadly serious. Next time. 2 words that change how you breathe in your own home. But in that moment, standing in the middle of a wrecked studio, spray paint drying on my walls, the smell of violation sinking into the air, something else settled in me. These men think they're escalating. They don't understand escalation. Not the real kind. They think vandalism is power. They think fear works like gravity, always pulling you down. They don't know what happens when you push a soldier past the threshold where pain stops meaning anything. They don't know that someone trained for war doesn't break, they plan. That message on my wall wasn't courage. It was desperation. A move made by people who sense control slipping through their fingers. And when men like that feel powerless, they get sloppy. Sloppy is predictable. Predictable can be managed. Before the real retaliation began, before the stranger returned with questions and a plan, I sat in that chaos, hand on my dog's head, staring at red letters drying on plaster, and I made a simple, quiet decision. I'm done reacting. I told myself I was done reacting. I wasn't done alone. He came back that night, the stranger from the beach. No knock, no theatrics. Just a quiet arrival as the sun dipped below the horizon. He stepped inside, scanned my rec studio, and didn't ask questions like when or why. He asked questions that meant something. How many entry points? How long has your dog been in recovery? Do they know you're alone? That was how I knew for sure. He was thinking like a soldier. Not just a fighter, a strategist. He didn't waste time on comfort. Compassion later. Preparation first. He moved through my house as if he'd lived there for years, yet touched nothing unless necessary. He checked windows, fingered the locks, measured the distance from the hallway to the back door using steps like they were units on a map. Then he started setting traps. Not traps that hurt, traps that inform. Tripwires made from fishing line, so thin you couldn't see them unless you knew to look. He tied them low, just above ankle height, secured to thumbtacks and tiny metal bells. Silent alarms. Only audible if you're trained to hear the right frequency. Darkness is your ally, he told me. Not dramatic. Matter of fact. He changed every bulb in the studio, unscrewed some halfway, loosened others just enough so that one flick of a switch would explode light into the room at unpredictable angles. He positioned a flashlight at the end of the hallway and taped black card over the lens, leaving just a sliver of beam. One direction visible, the other direction blind. Cell phone light traps, he said. He placed 2 phones on opposite sides of the living space, screens angled to reflect in glass picture frames. Anyone crossing the room will reveal themselves in reflection before they see you. One-way escape flashlights. He taped them low, near floor level, aimed toward exits. Anyone trying to flee would move toward light into visibility, while the rest of the house stayed dark. I watched him become exactly what those cadets pretended to be. A real predator. Not a bully. Not a thrill seeker. A planner. A protector trained in the art of quiet war. He didn't ask if I wanted to fight. He assumed I would. He looked at the spray-painted wall and said, "They'll come back tonight." Fear makes people hurry. He wasn't wrong. It was past midnight when the first wire trembled. A sound so faint most would have missed it, a tick, just barely audible. He raised a hand, silent signal. Stop. Listen. Another wire. Tick. Then footsteps. Too loud to be professional. Their arrogance making noise. He nodded at me once, then at the light switch. Studio lights exploded on. Every shadow became a harsh edge. One cadet screamed, not pain, not fear, rage, blind and stupid. He lunged from the hallway, weapon raised, using momentum instead of thought. The stranger stepped aside, quick pivot, and the cadet crashed into a shelf. The rifle fell, clattering to the floor. The stranger didn't pick it up. He didn't need it. A movement too fast to follow. A twist, a shift, controlled force, and a joint gave way under pressure, not broken but neutralized. The cadet collapsed, gasping, noise cut short by precision. Another cadet tried to duck, tried to run toward the light, exactly what the setup intended, and the stranger met him there, forearm pinning his motion, redirecting him into a corner. No punches. Just leverage. Controlled impact. No wasted movement. No rage. Only skill. The third cadet, the loudest from the beach, tried a different approach, barking threats about lawyers, authority, his father's rank, and how this is illegal, you psycho. The stranger's voice stayed calm. Illegal is breaking into a home. He dialed a number on his phone without looking away from the cadet. 911. He didn't wait. He didn't ask permission. He just reported it, clear, concise, clipped language that made dispatch take him seriously. Home invasion. 3 armed males. Intruder neutralized. No shots fired. This time, the cops listened. They arrived to a scene they couldn't reinterpret. Tripwires, spray paint threats, forced entry. 3 cadets on the ground, not injured, but subdued, and 1 woman in a wheelchair, bandaged, steadying her dog. No paperwork could twist that visual. No superior officer could bury that evidence. The sheriff's voice trembled just a little when he saw the message on the wall. He didn't look away from it. He didn't call it a misunderstanding. For the first time since the beach, I watched someone in authority realize what justice looks like when truth is unavoidable. The cadets tried whining again. "We want our lawyer." And the stranger responded quietly, more tired than angry. "You're going to need more than a lawyer." They didn't leave in handcuffs immediately. The night stretched long, with questions and photos and statements. But for once, the evidence didn't have to fight to be believed. Tripwires still hung across my doorway. The spray paint message was still fresh on the wall. The torn sketchbooks and broken brushes lay frozen mid-chaos. There was no room for interpretation. Arrests were made quietly, almost anticlimactic, like the moment after a storm when you expect thunder, but only hear a car door closing. The cadets didn't shout anymore. They didn't posture or brag or threaten lawsuits. They sat on the floor with zip ties digging into their wrists, staring at the drying red paint on my wall. Their superior officer came in person, face contracted into a shape that looked like rage but smelled like fear. He didn't fight the sheriff. He didn't try to negotiate. He only said one sentence, low and clipped, meant for the cadets. "You brought shame to the uniform before you ever earned it." The stranger stood beside me, expression unreadable. He didn't smile when the cadets were escorted out. Real operators don't take joy in domination, they take comfort in completion. Charges stuck. Not because justice woke up, but because evidence did what arrogance failed at. It told the truth. Breaking and entering. Assault. Illegal discharge of a firearm. Animal cruelty. Harassment. Felony intimidation. The kind of charges no academy wants attached to its name. My dog recovered slowly. The vet stabilized him, stitched him, gave him pain meds and a prognosis that included rest, patience, luck, and loyalty, the two things he never lacked. He limped for a while, and every time he breathed deep, I did too. Weeks passed. I replaced the paint on my walls. I taped the ripped pages of my sketches together, not to restore them, but to remember the moment they stopped being just art and became something like evidence of survival. I gained something back I didn't know I had lost. Dignity. Not pride. Dignity. The ability to look people in the eye without wondering if they saw me as broken. The stranger came by the clinic one afternoon. No dramatic entrance. No speech. He stood in the doorway while my dog slept, bandaged but alive, and said, "I'm leaving town tomorrow." I nodded. I didn't ask where. Operators don't travel with explanations. Before he turned to go, I said the one thing I hadn't said to anyone yet, the truth. "I commanded SEAL teams for 9 years, I told him. You picked the wrong wounded woman." It wasn't boasting. It wasn't bravado. It was reclamation. Identity, stated plain, without apology. He paused, half-turned like he wanted to see my face, but respected the need for distance. "Yeah," he said quietly, a small smile in the voice more than the mouth. I knew. I watched the cadets later, sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, wrists unbound but futures suddenly very real. Their faces looked pale, drained of the confidence they once wore like armor. Their arrogance died there, not in the fight, not in the spray paint, not in the courtroom, but in the moment they realized they hadn't just picked on a woman. They had challenged someone who understood violence better than they ever would, and still chose control over chaos. I rolled closer, dog leash in hand, wheels whispering over tile. They looked up at me, searching for some hint of who I really was. I gave it to them simply. "You picked the wrong target." No anger. No insult. Just truth. Then I said it again, for clarity, for closure, for anyone listening. I was a Navy SEAL commander. That was the moment everything around us changed. Not loudly. Not visibly. Just with the quiet shifting of balance when a truth finds air. Their eyes dropped. Their voices disappeared. And I took my dog home.